All right, Nolan. So, in addition to electing a new city council and having a mayor's race on the ballot in November, we have some ballot proposals in the city of Detroit. Three of them. Let's start with the one that would make people goofier in the city. The one that would decriminalize mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms. What do you think about that?
Well, I love mushrooms on my pizza, Steve, but I'm not sure about this one because it decriminalizes, but it doesn't actually make them legal. I guess that's not within the purview of city voters. So it decriminalizes mushrooms, and I am all for the legalization of drugs, of almost any drug. But I do think that the legalization should become with a regulatory framework to protect people, just like we do with alcohol. This one doesn't come with any such framework.
No, and it is a very piecemeal approach to the idea of what to do about illegal drugs. More generally, I don't know that we should just go down the list and tick different things off and say, well, we're going to decriminalize this, but not that. We should have a pretty broad discussion about how we want to deal with drug enforcement in cities like Detroit. I am not as much in favor of legalizing drugs as you are. I think in a city like Detroit, especially given the problems we have with employment in particular that are tied to drugs, it's something we want to think about. It's something we really want to talk about and what it does to communities, what the sales do to communities. But this one seems to just come out of left field, like someone was doing mushrooms and came up with an idea that, hey, this shouldn't be a law.
Well, our efforts to criminalize drugs and keep them illegal, that hasn't worked in terms of keeping people from using them. And I think it's time to stop and revisit that because it has, the whole criminalization process has ruined a lot of lives apart from the drug use. Other one on the ballot would replace representative democracy with direct democracy, or at least would risk doing that. It would allow ballot proposals to appropriate money from the city treasury, from the city budget. And man, I think that's a terrible idea. You get a situation like California where almost every decision is made by a ballot proposal. We elect leaders, mayor, council for a reason to make these decisions.
Yeah, one of the things that I think people don't think about when these kind of ideas come up is that this would be available to everybody. It's the activist community that is pushing this because they want to have more say over how the city spends its money. They presumably would like corporations and corporate interests to have less say, but this would just give them just as much say. Anybody would be able to do this and convince enough voters with a campaign to allow them to do it. It's just not a way to run a government. This is not, it's not efficient, it's dangerous. There's a lot of very small interest groups corporate or grassroots, who could end up deciding how we spend big parts of the budget. It's better to lobby the people that we elect and say, look, I want you to do this. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Absolutely. And finally, a proposal to establish a reparations committee to study paying reparations for slavery and past discrimination. What should that look like, Steve?
I mean, I think continuing the discussion that has been started in the country about the things that have been done by government in particular to disenfranchise African Americans, to steal from us, to assign us to the second class. I'm all in favor of all of that inquiry. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for the city of Detroit to be part of that inquiry. This is a continuation of an idea that was rejected as part of a massive rewrite of the city charter. This is pulling that one idea out and saying, why don't we go ahead and talk about it? I think it's a step we got to take.
Well, I mean, if they're looking at creating programs to help small businesses, to improve education, scholarships, to deal with the effects of long-term racism across the spectrum, I think that's one thing. Direct checks written to individuals, I think, is quite another. You'd have to be certain that racism is going to end with this generation, because what are you going to do for the next generation then that suffers many of the same effects?
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea here is to start thinking about it, to start looking at how do you unpack, first of all, the responsibility for what's happened, and then second of all, what you might do about it. The idea of compensating people for being wronged is not new. When it comes to African Americans, we did it after the Holocaust in large measure. People were made whole for the things that happened to them. Japanese Americans were paid a recompense in large measure for the mistreatment during the Second World War. That's something we've got a history of. African Americans have been left out of that conversation. I don't think that makes a lot of sense.
In both those cases, so they were the actual victims being compensated, not generations later. And I think, it's a different approach then. And so, but a lot of cities are doing this. A lot of cities are studying it, and it's taken different forms. So voters will have a chance to decide all of these issues next Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely.